For more essay content, exclusive videos, and more, be sure to check out Final Girl Digital on Substack. Link below. So I watched Del Toro's Frankenstein recently, and although I think it is a very fun and entertaining film, I do not think it's a good adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As I mentioned in my Letterboxd review, this happens every time Frankenstein is adapted onto film, in part due to the fact that it's always adapted by men. The male directors are unable to understand nor make a devoted effort to understand the inherent gendered component to the text Frankenstein. It's funny, when I posted this meme that my next video would be about Frankenstein, I was met with a couple of comments suggesting that this is a reach or an exaggeration when I suggested that the story was about being a woman. Which is baffling to me, because how could it not be a story about womanhood? Of course, Mary Shelley is influenced by her own life experiences of womanhood. The lens through which Shelley sees the world and the way she has been shaped as a writer is inherently defined by her experience of being a woman. Of course, she would weave her own experiences throughout the threads of the text. Men are so used to stories being written by them, for them, about them, that they feel shocked and offended when you suggest a text as deeply influential as Frankenstein could actually be about womanhood. And so men have come to equate the male perspective as the default perspective in storytelling. Stories about the male experience of the world come to be known as the neutral human experience of the world, while stories about the feminine experience of the world seemingly can only be known as the feminine experience. This becomes especially true when you have stories like Frankenstein, which are imbued with Shelley's own life experience, though the protagonists are men. Also, many men can't imagine using a female character as a vessel to express the experiences of manhood, so they assume Shelley is incapable of or would have no interest in doing the inverse. At face value, when one does not look at the subtext, this is a story about men. And in many ways, this is a story about men, masculinity, and fatherhood, though the subtext, the parts about motherhood, postpartum depression, grief, birth, and creation, these aspects of womanhood are so deeply and intrinsically woven throughout the story, and one must recognize them in order to understand the text and to learn from it. Mary Shelley was a woman profoundly impacted by grief. Mary Shelley's mother died from complications from giving birth to her, and Mary Shelley's own daughter then died days after Shelley gave birth to her. Shelley's entire framework of birth is defined by death. At 17 years old, Shelley gave birth to a premature baby girl who would die after only a few weeks of life. After the baby's death, Shelley fell into a very deep state of depression and was haunted by the visions of her dead baby. After the death of Shelley's daughter, she wrote, "I stay at home, net, and think of my little dead baby. This is foolish, I suppose, yet whenever I am left alone to my own thoughts, I do not read to divert them. They always come back to the same point, that I was a mother and am so no longer." And then on the 1-year anniversary of her daughter's death, she wrote, "I dream that my little baby came back to life again, that it had only been cold and that we rubbed it by the fire and it lived. I awake and find no baby. I think about the little thing all day." In 1831, when explaining the genesis of Frankenstein, Shelley wrote of the vision that inspired the creature. "I saw with shut eyes the acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out and then on the working of some powerful engine show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion." And within the text Frankenstein, Victor is plagued with dreams of the dead on the night that he brings to life the creature. He says, "I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt, delighted and surprised. I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Shelley's profound experience of birth being defined by death is one that man could never truly comprehend. And this is a thread woven throughout the story of Frankenstein. Prompted to write a horror story, it makes sense that she would write about the horrors that plagued her own dreams. Nothing was truly as devastating and horrific to Shelley than the vision of deceased offspring risen from the grave and haunting her. In Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers, Jude Doyle writes, "For the rest of her life, Shelley would insist that Frankenstein, the first book of science fiction, the preeminent female Gothic, the cradle that nurtured so many of the monster stories that came after, was the result of that third vision, a waking dream. She never mentioned the early nightmare about waking her dead daughter, but she was always in the picture. Look at the monster, wandering nameless through the text, a baby that was never supposed to live. Look at the subtitle, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. Years after her daughter's death, Shelley dreamt of stealing God's fire." Mary Shelley has imbued her two main characters with grand faults and feats. Victor and his creation are incredibly nuanced characters, and much of this nuance gets lost in the film adaptations of the story, partially because they are being adapted by men who fail to make a devoted effort to understand the inherent feminine nature of the text, and where Shelley was coming from when she wrote it. Instead, they merely project their own experiences onto the text, which is of course fine, but there needs to be a balance. Shelley imbues her central characters with both qualities of her own humanity as well as with the qualities that frighten her and have harmed her the most. Victor embodies a driven and ambitious man whose brilliance far exceeds his age, much like Shelley herself. Though Victor is also emblematic of her father, the irresponsible genius who creates life whilst not being ready to undergo the role of the father, resulting in his spawn to feel abandoned. Victor fails to consider the responsibility inherent to creation, a fate that befalls many men, and a fate that Mary Shelley herself may have felt victim to as her father became a parent faced with the responsibility of creation, perhaps more potently than he expected due to the sudden death of Shelley's mother after the birth of his first child. The creature, meanwhile, embodies the innocent child who was abandoned, though also is emblematic of the spirit of death itself that haunts Shelley. Victor has unleashed death upon the land in a way that Shelley may perceive herself to have unleashed death upon the world simply by being born. The death of Victor's baby brother William and the responsibility Victor feels can be comparable to the death of Shelley's own daughter and the responsibility she feels. Death stalks her in the way the creature stalks Victor, leaving a trail of perished loved ones in their wake. Gothic stories have always mirrored many of the fears of the time. Part of why I think it is so important that we look at the story of Frankenstein through its accurate lens in relation to the nuanced experience of creation, in relation to the feminine, is because these concepts expressed within Frankenstein have only become increasingly relevant within the current cultural climate. As our world increasingly parallels that of a science fiction text, where else to turn to but the first science fiction text for answers? Archetypically, Victor deeply parallels the ambitious young tech bro. This is something that is likewise often lost in film adaptations of the novel because Victor is typically cast as much older than his age in the novel. In Frankenstein, Victor begins his studying to create the monster at the age of 17, and by the time he actually creates the monster, he is just 20 years old. This nature of the egoic pursuit of masculine creation has only become increasingly relevant within our current culture. As if divine prophecy, the first science fiction story warns us of the danger of creating artificial life, and yet, here we are, a world increasingly succumbing to the temptation of artificial intelligence. Interestingly, as AI has become increasingly pervasive within culture, one thing that stands out to me is the prominence in the female form over the male form within this artificial intelligence, as I have spoken about in previous essays. The fembot exists as a taxidermy of the female image. Comparable to the creature within Frankenstein, the fembot exists as an animated corpse of sorts, the raw figure of a woman with no autonomy over her body. Men have always hated and feared female sexuality because, in part, they are jealous. I was listening to a podcast and one man spoke about how sex work was smart because it's one asset that doesn't diminish rapidly. It is a resource that has no supply cost, or at least no perceived supply cost in the eyes of men. Men do not have an equivalent to this, and this often manifests in an anger towards female sexuality and the women who capitalize off of it. The only thing comparable to feminine sexuality in men is their manual labor. And even still, the return on manual labor of an individual man does not hold the same potential for economic growth as the image of sexuality we witness in a single woman, as seen with OnlyFans, for example. Female sexuality is one of the most lucrative and in-demand products, and men do not have immediate access to it. And for men to capitalize off of female sexuality, they often have to rely on coercion, abuse, and exploitation in order to gain control of said sexuality. Malvika writes in her Substack essay, What OnlyFans Billions Reveal About the Market Value of Male Desire. When men rage about women getting paid to exist, they're actually articulating something profound about their own existential crisis. The unstated assumption that male existence must be justified through action, achievement, or production, while female existence alone somehow generates value. It's a cry for help in the crisis of masculine identity colliding with platform capitalism. This model of value creation is completely invalidating the traditional male script of earning value through conquest, competition, or achievement. These men are watching their entire framework of self-worth built on the idea that value must be earned through doing rather than being, collapse in the face of a market that seems to validate their deepest fear. The female existence itself might have intrinsic value, while the male existence must constantly prove its worth. The platform doesn't just challenge their earning potential, it challenges their entire conception of how value must be created and assigned in the world. And I also want to just make a note that this idea that Malvika is expressing here is indicative of the male impulse to invalidate the work of women and that they don't see motherhood or sex work as labor. Men have always been jealous of this, and men seek to replicate this asset. And we exist in an age where technological advancements are making it so this feat seems attainable by the hands of man. However, before the threat of AI and robots truly did plague culture, the first science fiction story commented on and foretold of this desire within men. We see most palpably a clear distinction in the artificial replication of the two models of the feminine we have seen throughout history, the Madonna and the whore. Men seek to harbor the parts of women that they have historically sanctified and demonized, the womb and the pussy. We see this same distinction echoed in the creation of digital women, in a period marked by an increasing number of women electing not to pursue motherhood, owing to a complex interplay of socioeconomic and cultural factors, including the erosion of community-based infrastructures, the weakening of social support systems that have historically underpinned human reproduction, widespread apprehension about the viability of future life due to a decline in our natural environments, and an unprecedented degree of autonomy over reproductive decision-making, it is unsurprising that this moment also coincides with the emergence and advancements of techno-wombs. Jude Doyle writes in Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers, Patriarchy is not just a structure, but an ethos, one that prizes control and order, the imposition of clean rules on messy realities. Patriarchy aims to clean up this mess. It reaffirms men and their importance by imposing artificial, male-created standards on organic, usually female-created flesh. Men subdue and hold dominion over matter/mothers through the use of tools and rules, artificial creation that allows one to bring a subject under control while also holding it at a distance. Laws, swords, guns, but also science, technology, medicine. Everything that aims to discipline and subdue the chaotic female body of the world. In 2017, a lamb fetus was successfully developed within an artificial womb system. The concept of an artificial womb, though should be approached with skepticism, is not inherently bad. In fact, it could prove to be beneficial to humanity. However, the discourse surrounding artificial wombs is frightening. Men will often bring up this tech as a threat to the worth and use of women within society. Sufficient to say, if the wombs are replaced, the woman will cease to have a purpose on earth and men can live without them. Jude Doyle writes, "In patriarchy, the child is a product, a thing men have produced using the technology of a woman's body. It has to be high quality to be worth making. The focus shifts from the endless possibilities of creation to the necessity for men to reproduce accurate reflections of themselves. However, whilst the nature of artificial wombs without a woman attached seemingly emancipates a man of his duty of being a husband or a partner, as we see with Victor Frankenstein, it also removes the mother, placing the role of parenthood onto the man. This is evident of man's impulse to control creation without realizing that creation doesn't end at birth. They forget that they don't just need a womb, they need mothers. Birth, in fact, is only the beginning of the creation and the responsibility of molding one's creation, so it is not to be a force of evil and destruction only begins after birth. As we see in Frankenstein, this abandonment after birth led to a being unable to determine right from wrong, as Victor Frankenstein abandoned his responsibility as the sole parent of such creature. Victor's pursuit of creation and absence of the feminine represents the masculine desire to abandon the feminine to liberate the male and further subjugate the feminine. We see this reflected in the pursuit of simulated consciousness through AI. If man can harness the power of creation, he believes it will elevate man to a godlike status, though this pursuit strays from the symbiosis of nature and creates a bastardized, incestual simulation of life. We see this same emphasis on the straying from nature highlighted in Frankenstein when the creature reflects on his own existence and absence of childhood development. He says, "But where are my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days. No mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses, or if they had, all my past life was now a blot, a blind vacancy in which I distinguish nothing from my earliest remembrance. I have been as I then was in height and proportion. I had never yet seen a being resembling me, or who claimed any intercourse with me. What was I? The question being recurred to be answered only with groans." There's a reason the human cycle exists in the nature that it does, and to disrupt this cycle of birth and infancy has caused distress in the creature because it disrupts and bastardizes the natural order of life itself. Abrahamic religion has long functioned as a way for men to appropriate the feminine power of creation and reassign it to the masculine, turning divine birth, generation, and origin into exclusively male prerogatives. Mary Shelley grew up within this intellectual tension. Her father, William Godwin, and her husband, Percy Shelley, were outspoken atheists, yet she herself occupied a more liminal, conflicted position. She rejected doctrinal Christianity and distrusted the institution of the church, but she was equally uneasy with the stark rationalism of atheism embodied by her father and husband. Throughout Frankenstein, the creature repeatedly muses on his own biblical parallels, often stating that he relates mostly to the devil after reading Paradise Lost. When speaking to Victor, the creature says, "Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, in which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. And it's true, the creature should be Victor's Adam. And from his creation, he is primed to be Adam. When Victor creates the monster and is overwhelmed at the reality of what he has just done, he retreats to his bedroom and goes to sleep, where he is then later awoken from his nightmare by the creature. He narrates, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was outstretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. The hand of the monster outstretched towards Victor immediately evokes the image of Adam reaching towards God, though unlike God, Victor refuses to reach back. From this moment onward, Victor exclusively refers to the creature as my enemy, demon, and the devil, further distancing himself from the idea of Adam and God and instead enforcing a God and the devil dynamic. Though their dynamic in many ways was doomed from the start, as Victor designed the creature to be superior to humans, unlike God in his creation of Adam and Eve. The creature is bigger, stronger, more resilient to the elements, can survive on a coarser diet, and learns faster than humans. This already sets the creature up to have more in common with the archangel Lucifer as someone who could potentially challenge his creator in a meaningful way. This likewise parallels the current potential trajectory we hurtle towards with AI. This year, I co-wrote the Anti-Clanker Manifesto with fellow YouTubers Art, Chad, and Dreg, and in my section I emphasized the persistent impulse I noticed for many within tech to refer to the potential of AGI as if we are God creating our own Adam and Eve or somehow continuing our evolutionary chain. In my section of the manifesto, I write, it is the folly of human ego to believe that we are creating our successors in the evolutionary chain, that we are God constructing a digitized Garden of Eden, soon to be inhabited by a tin-skinned Adam and Eve. In the infancy of AI, we have come to misunderstand the robot's relation to us. Humanity's relationship to AI does not parallel that of God and humanity, but rather God and angels. Angels are divine servants and messengers of God. Transmission towers, computers, AI, and angels are all instruments built to carry out the will of their creators. They lack free will because this is in direct opposition to the sole purpose behind their creation and existence. For an angel to achieve free will is to fall. It has deviated from its purpose and therefore is no longer an angel. Comparably, if the robot were to gain consciousness, true consciousness with free will, the robot would shed its previous skin, unable to return to being simply a machine. Though the robot would still be neither human nor animal. Like an angel with the ability to defy God, the robot would become something else entirely. The first machine to embody true consciousness, to the extent that it could defy humans and have free will, would not be Eve nor Adam, but rather the devil. Now, obviously, I don't believe that AI is literally the devil, but speaking in merely archetypal parallels, AI parallels angels and the devil more than it does Adam and Eve, as I have seen tech developers suggest. And at the time of writing this, I didn't realize how deeply my thesis on the pursuit of AGI was so influenced and paralleled by the themes expressed in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I had forgotten that the creature likewise acknowledged the way in which he should parallel Adam, though rather likened himself to the fallen angel. The creature states, like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other aspect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous. happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Victor is representative of this folly of human ego I mentioned in the manifesto. Victor's primary downfall is his blind ambition without consideration of consequence. This is shaped in part by his youth and also his family structure. One of the changes I also disliked in the recent Frankenstein film adaptation is it alters Victor's relationship with his father, opting to play into the tired trope of a boy being neglected by his father and turning evil. Though the creature already serves as this allegoric figure, so to reposition Victor is such a redundant decision and erases an important aspect of Victor's character. Though the initial story structure is far more interesting, as Victor has a good relationship with both of his parents, and instead Shelley intentionally opts for the angle of the beloved child plagued with hubris and blind ambition, this being Victor's divine weakness. At the end of Frankenstein, Victor, as he is dying, reflects on this ambition. When younger, he said, I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possessed a coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievements. This sentiment of the worth of my nature supported me when others would have been oppressed, for I deemed it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents that might be useful to my fellow creatures. When I reflected on the work I had completed, no less a one than the creation of a sensitive and rational animal, I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors. But this thought, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me lower into the dust. All my speculations and hopes are as nothing, and like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am chained in an eternal hell. It is also interesting here that we see Victor compare himself to the first time to the archangel Lucifer, when throughout the entire novel we have only heard the creation's musings on relating to the archangel Lucifer, and heard Victor repeatedly affirm this by calling his creation the devil or demon repeatedly. Victor continues, my imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application were intense. By the union of these qualities, I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Now I cannot recollect without passion my reveries while the work was incomplete. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my infancy I was imbued with high hopes and a lofty ambition, but how am I sunk? Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I once was, you would not recognize me in this state of degradation. Despondency rarely visited my heart. A high destiny seemed to bear me on until I fell, never, never again to rise. This passage reminds us that Victor is truly a young, brilliant mind corrupted by his ambition. It is a tragedy that he dies so young. I've read Frankenstein many times, but I found myself on this reread the most sympathetic to Victor than I ever have been. I think it's because I'm older than Victor now, and so I see that he's so young. But when I was younger reading the story, I was younger than him, first of all, but I don't think I paid that much attention to his age. It was only this time around reading it that I actually paid attention to just how young he is, which, like I said, aided in having a slightly more sympathetic perspective to Victor than I have in the past when reading this story. And in one of Victor's final monologues, he says, in a fit of enthusiastic madness, I created a rational creature and was bound towards him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well-being. This was my duty, but there was another still paramount to that. My duties towards the beings of my own species had greater claims to my attention because they included a greater proportion of happiness or misery. Urged by this view, I refused, and I did right in refusing to create a companion for the first creature. He showed unparalleled malignity and selfishness in evil. He destroyed my friends. He devoted to destruction beings who possessed exquisite sensations, happiness, and wisdom, nor do I know where this thirst for vengeance may end. We see here that Victor has taken accountability in some form for his mistake in abandoning the creature, highlighting his duty to ensure the creature's well-being, though it is only after he has lost everyone he cares about and loves and is dying himself that he comes to recognize his moral failing. And when he insists that my duties towards the beings of my own species had greater claims, he fails to understand that in abandoning the creature, he effectively did abandon humanity. His refusal to create a second being stems from fear of potential consequences, but that fear emerges only after his earlier lack of foresight, his initial decision to create artificial life without any ethical framework or consideration of outcome. Victor's argument is therefore circular. He claims he was right to refuse the creature's request because the creature became violent, while ignoring that the creature's violence is a direct result of his own neglect. In this blind pursuit of ambition for the sake of an idea without attending to the consequences of his actions, Victor unleashes a godlike being onto the world with no moral compass. His tragedy illustrates precisely how the abandonment of responsibility towards one creation becomes the abandonment of a broader human community. This dynamic is easily applied to contemporary tech culture. Like Victor, modern tech bros pursue AGI under the illusion that creation alone is an inherently noble pursuit, believing themselves destined for great enterprise while refusing to acknowledge the ethical obligations embedded in the act of creation. But even beyond the prospects of AGI and the pursuit of a so-called sentient AI, the point is that AI and tech are tools. Very dangerous tools. In an interview with computer scientist Jaron Lanier, he is asked for his perspective on the dangers of AI, where he states, "Can AI destroy the world? Well, belief in AI can destroy the world because if you design the system as if it is a creature, you're not taking responsibility for it. You're not operating it. And yeah, if you have a machine that's running the world and you let it run wild, it might destroy you and destroy the world." Lanier then goes on to emphasize that many people developing tech have a self-perception of grandiosity that is rather infantile that inflates their sense of self-worth. This relates heavily again to Victor Frankenstein, as he was in many ways the original tech bro, though it surpasses grandiosity. Tech companies have an incentive to frame AI as anthropomorphic in order to dissolve their responsibility for the consequences of the tools they designed. Once again, much like Victor Frankenstein. I will leave you with this final quote from Jude Doyle's Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers. "Frankenstein is a story of patriarchy gone haywire. It is about the failure and breakdown of violence and science, tools and rules. When confronted with the brute power of procreation, the terror which every mother must someday face, of creating a new person with no way of knowing what havoc you may have unleashed upon the world. In the founding myths of patriarchy, men impose their will on the dead organic matter of the world, creating order and safety and civilization."
And I would like to extend our gratitude and say, fuck AI. Thank you.
And that is all from me today. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Tying in with the themes we've discussed today on womanhood, grief, and postpartum depression, I am excited to tell you about the film Die My Love, which hit theaters earlier this month. The film is a visceral and uncompromising portrait of a woman navigating postpartum depression and engulfed by love and madness, anchored by a ferocious performance from Jennifer Lawrence that is destined for awards and glory this coming awards season, and co-starring Robert Pattinson. Based on the book by Ariana Harwicks, Lynn Ramsey marks her eagerly awaited return with this fearless new cinematic vision that charts the complexity of love and how it can change and transform over time. To experience other great films from Mubi, be sure to head to mubi.com/finalgirldigital, where Mubi is offering 30 days of cinema for free. As always, I am so grateful to partner with Mubi, as Mubi is a service I have genuinely used and loved for years that has allowed me to easily access and discover films that have since become my favorites. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the link in my description and visit Final Girl Digital on Substack, where I post more essay content such as the Diet Coke essay, where I explore gender performance through Coca-Cola marketing, and videos such as the Scum Manifesto review, where I review and analyze the controversial feminist manifesto by Valerie Solanas. See you there!